What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy show with me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, November 13th. We are live, so welcome everyone in. Say hi in the chat as you guys pop in. Appreciate the comments as always. Keeping the chat lively is always a good thing. Conversations with each other as well as me are always welcome. Before we dive into the main topic of the show, I wanted to quickly hit on some big news that just came, or not just came through. One just came through regarding Aaron Rodgers, but kind of the big news of the day, right? Big news of the day, Anthony Richardson is the starter yet again. If you head over to my Twitter, and I need to put it on TikTok and Instagram as well, but if you head over to my Twitter, I kind of told you the future on that one. I do the majority of my content with Yahoo Sports. I think most of you know. If not, now you know. And every single Sunday, I am live on Yahoo's Fantasy Football Live, and we touch a wide variety of topics. But the first thing we do to kick off the show is our main storylines of the week. My main storyline of the week on Sunday was the fact that this could very easily end up being a Joe Flacco flop on Sunday that forces them to reverse course and say, okay, we might have been a little bit wrong in rest of season. Maybe we're not going to go with Joe Flacco and we'll switch back to Anthony Richardson as the starter. That happened. Kind of told the future on that one. If you want to go check it out, it's kind of a cool video because again, we kind of knew that Anthony Richardson, they weren't completely done with him. I think some people felt like once you go down this path, you can't. Obviously, we saw Carolina reverse course. They were kind of forced to because of the Andy Dalton injury. If it hadn't have happened, we don't technically know if they would have gone backwards on that one. But these young quarterbacks often, obviously, a lot of times they need to give them time to grow, right? And when we were looking at Anthony Richardson, maybe this 2-little-game break would be helpful towards him. It probably would have been helpful if they had told him specifically, hey, man, you're struggling out there. You need to take some time off to get your mind right. We'll come back to you. We're not done. We love you. You're our guy. You're our franchise quarterback, but we want you to just take some time to get yourself in the right place. Maybe you say, we've got some difficult matchups and we want to, back off you just for a second or something, like just anything. And they didn't really handle that the right way. But now, because Joe Flacco has come out and laid multiple eggs, and it's very clear that their best path to victory is not Joe Flacco. Who would have thought? Now they are back to Anthony Richardson, which is very interesting. We had no Michael Pittman last week. I kind of feel like we're not going to get Michael Pittman. And it sucks because I'm a Michael Pittman stan. I love him. And I see you guys dropping questions. I will get to them in just a second. So keep dropping them for sure. But again, more than likely, Michael Pittman dealing with that back injury. He also said he had another injury that popped up as well. So if they give him some time to rest, that's probably beneficial for them. Technically, they're still in the hunt, really. I mean, it's just teams are still in it regardless. It's just kind of a weird season where there's a bunch of guys at the top, your Detroits and your Kansas Cities, and then a whole bunch of mediocrity, right? So there's a lot of movement that teams can make. So it's possible that Richardson gets out there, balls out. But again, Pittman probably not somebody that we want to turn to right now if we don't have the option or if he's still dealing with that injury. Josh Downs, I know people are posting and saying, oh my gosh, Josh Downs down bad for the rest of the season. I don't see it that way. We did see some chemistry between Josh Downs and Anthony Richardson. So I don't think this is a complete and total loss here because it's not as if we saw last week Downs have a ton of upside with Flacco at quarterback. So no, I don't. I think we can still utilize Downs as a flex option and just kind of monitor it moving forward. Other news that we had there, Aaron Rodgers, just a few hours ago, I think, said that he wants to play in 2025. And the reason that I highlighted this as news, because it may not seem like big news to some people, but as a Packers fan, this is very interesting to me. Because with Aaron Rodgers, and really often with Green Bay quarterbacks, we've been through it. We went through the ringer. So Jets now, I'm sorry. It's your turn to deal with this. This is what we were trying to avoid. Often they spend the offseason debating, what's my future? Am I going to come back? I'm not sure. Aaron has to go into the darkness to figure out what's going on. Apparently, that's not happening. It's very intriguing that he has already come out and said, "No, I'm playing in 2025." So him coming out and making this announcement, once this man says something, he's not the type of player that likes to go backwards and kind of try and save face on that one. If he says something, it is what it is. So we're probably looking at Aaron Rodgers next season. It'll be interesting because obviously we'll have a new head coach there in New York, but the weapons are top notch. It's not as if, oh my gosh, Aaron needs additional weapons in order to succeed. No, you've got everything that you could possibly need there. What more could you need? At the same time, we've also got the defense that struggled with the exit of Robert Saleh. That was kind of expected. That was obviously their strong defensive mind of the team, but still extreme young talent there as well. Lots of talent there. So I mean, you kind of look at it and you're like, yeah, Aaron comes back next year. We're probably expecting a very similar situation. Improved coaching could help things. Maybe they cross our fingers, get rid of Nathaniel Hackett would help things as well. If they can get a good offensive mind there, can we trust that? I don't really know, right? So we might be in a repeat hiatus with the Jets in 2025. So that was very interesting news that came out. Now, today's main topic for the show, in addition to answering your questions, is panic meter for wide receivers, because we've got a ton of wide receivers that are they're down bad. They're in a bad situation right now. And I wanted to kind of talk about expectations for rest of season with these struggling receivers. I wrote an article on Sunday with Yahoo. You can find it on my Yahoo writers page about these receivers and several others that we're going to talk about here. But the main ones that I wanted to focus on are DJ Moore, Brian Thomas, and Malik Nabers. We can touch on Devontae. I mean, we talked about Aaron Rodgers, but we can touch on Devontae and Deebo Samuel and CeeDee Lamb a little bit too. But really those main three are the ones that I wanted to cover. Before I dive into that, we already have a ton of questions being dropped as well. So I want to go ahead and answer any questions that you guys have. So jumping into the chat here, because we've got a ton. Again, if I miss your questions, feel free to ask them again, just because I'm kind of talking. And we've also got mailbag questions as well. So fun. Estime or Bigsby for Bucky. I'm okay with trading. I would hold on to Estime. If I was going to trade one versus the other, it would be Bigsby for sure. And that kind of dives into our Brian Thomas conversation as well. As we're looking at that Jacksonville offense, it is extremely apparent that, unfortunately, we cannot move forward with any of these players with Mac Jones at quarterback. And we knew that. That wasn't really, and I might have held some mild hope that maybe he could come out and tap into something, because he's got talent somewhere in there. Maybe he could tap into it and have a little rebound here. We've seen it happen with multiple quarterbacks here. You find yourself in a new place, new opportunity, new system, and it works better for you when you can rebound. Unfortunately, Jacksonville is not really the place for that. If he's looking for his Sam Darnold moment, it's going to have to be a little bit later in his career at another location. But looking at that Jacksonville offense, Tank Bigsby's role, unfortunately, with Travis Etienne, both of them being utilized, and obviously injury does affect things there as well. But Bigsby is the more productive early down back. He does not offer the same receiving upside when Travis Etienne is in there. At the same time, we know that when the Jags are playing from behind, it doesn't bode well for work on the ground for Tank Bigsby, puts him in a bad situation, unfortunately. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, you get into this weird situation where Tank Bigsby is now kind of an unusable asset, unfortunately. And I hate that for him, for sure. But when we're looking at him and what we can do with him rest of season, as long as Travis Etienne is in that offense, as long as we've got a situation where we can't feel comfortable with the quarterback situation. Now, we did hear that, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about Brian Thomas, but we did hear that it's possible that Trevor Lawrence comes back after the bye week. Possible is interesting, right? Now they're playing this week. Trevor Lawrence won't play. Then we would have the bye week for them. And then I guess that would be, I don't know what math, week 13 that we could potentially see Trevor Lawrence back. But that's just the potential. It's also difficult to imagine that they push him back from an injury when the season is essentially destitute, unfortunately, right? So when you're looking at it from that perspective, selling where you can on this Jags offense does make a lot of sense if you have the ability to do so. Reed for Pollard. I have wide receiver depth, but need running back depth. For Reed, and that was a difficult one because with the Green Bay wide receivers, they're difficult to trust on a weekly basis. Reed is the clear wide receiver one in that offense, but unfortunately, that does come with volatility because of the way that they spread the ball around. So when we are looking at, unfortunately, the situation that we've got here with the Green Bay Packers wide receiver core, you're probably not getting the value that you want out of it for Reed. So in theory, I would want higher than Pollard for Reed, but because of the perception of the Packers wide receiver core, I'm okay with that trade. I think that's perfectly fine. I might try and aim a little bit higher than Pollard just because mild-ish concerns for Pollard with Tajay Spears in the backfield. Now, his return, obviously, I think Pollard was also dealt with a little bit of an injury, came back in, so maybe that has something to do, kind of skews I don't know if there's any way to go back and look and try. I guess other than looking at the game and trying to figure it out. But again, when we're looking at the game and trying to figure out how much that injury that he was removed for a second with Pollard, how much that affected his carries versus Tajay Spears, I don't think it was a major difference. I think that we should expect Tajay to have a little bit of a role moving forward. Pollard has obviously had aggressive volume this season, and he's done very well with the volume, all things considered. I do think that he still is a solid RB2 if you need depth at running back, considering how strong he has looked this season, a clear bounce back. He's looked far different, more explosive, been successful, despite the fact that the Titans have had all kinds of struggles offensively. I do think that that's perfectly okay to make that trade right there, even though we did see a little bit of a nick in terms of his volume. Drop Bigsby for Estime. Yep, along the same lines, I would definitely do that. Would you trade Tyreek Hill for another wide receiver? If so, who? So Tyreek Hill, saying that he's been dealing with an injury, the hand injury, unfortunately. Playing through that does make a lot of sense in terms of his production being underwhelming, even since the return of Tua Tagovailoa. We expected Tua to come back, this offense to get back on track, and it's gotten back on track for Devon Achane. It's been fantastic for him. It hasn't been fantastic for the wide receivers, unfortunately. We see Jaylen Waddle just being kind of destitute. Unfortunately, he looked like for a second, I've got one dynasty team with Jaylen Waddle, and good God, it's Jaylen Waddle, Chris Olave. This poor team is just struggling to keep it together with these wide receivers twos that have just wide receiver two, wide receiver ones that have just wildly underwhelmed there. But Jaylen Waddle just not contributing to the offense, and I feel like that's not going to change. There is upside for Tyreek Hill. If you're trading him right now, I do think you can still get good value out of him. I don't know if you can convince someone to trade Tyreek Hill for Terry McLaurin. That feels too close. I don't think you can get away with that. Maybe you can trick somebody into doing it. But if I'm trading Tyreek Hill, I don't want to downgrade significantly, because at the end of the day, if he and Tua can get back on the same page, and if his little injury stops bothering him, again, he has the highest upside of arguably any wide receiver in the NFL. So you could be trading him and downgrading, and then he turns into the Tyreek Hill that we expected. Because while for the most part, the rest of Miami's matchups are not very friendly for Tua, but we've seen that the wide receivers, specifically Tyreek Hill, can still thrive even in bad matchups for Tua. So I'm still okay with Tyreek Hill, but if you're trading him away, you want to aim slightly down a tier. From where we had original draft capital. You don't want to drop down significantly, in my opinion. I would not sell for, I would be okay with trading him for George Pickens. I'm okay with that. That one is a jump down in terms of where we're looking at him in his role and how George Pickens has really progressed with Russell Wilson at quarterback. That's one that I would feel okay with. Sorry for the barking in the background. That just means that somebody came home. This dog has no self-control. But yeah, if I'm jumping down, I would try and aim high, aim for a Terry McLaurin. Or if I can't get something like that, then I could jump to a George Pickens is someone who is realistic, but below that, I would not sell. Oh, this is a fun question because it's not fantasy football related. Christian asks, have a $25 parlay that wins $66K, Lamar MVP, Saquon Offensive Player of the Year, Watt Defensive Player of the Year. Oh, $2,500 cash out. Would you hold? I would hold. I would. I know that's tempting right there. Oh my gosh. And I say that in my mind, I'm such a cash out person. Like I'm one to like, okay, cool. Let me grab that money right there. But man, those are some good. The only one that obviously Saquon offensive player of the year is a little bit risky there, but I think you'll still be well in play with that. Watt defensive player of the year will be well in play. And Lamar, I think I know they're floating around names in terms of other AD MVPs, but I feel like that one's the lock. So I would hold for a couple of weeks if I were you. Let that cash out grow. Because that one, I think, feels like you've still got some room on that one. That was a nice bet. Congratulations on that one. That Saquon one was risky. Good for you. That was bold. I like that. Nice bet. Mike Evans and Pacheco for Tillman and JT. I'm okay with that trade if you're a team that has a ton of upside right now, you're sailing into the playoffs, you're perfectly fine holding on to and waiting for Mike Evans and Pacheco, who are probably going to come back in the same kind of similar time frame. I'm okay with holding on that one. This is a very even trade, in my opinion, although some people might not believe it because of the Tillman portion of it. I do think Cedric Tillman is for real. He just hasn't had the opportunity within that offense playing behind Amari Cooper. He had a very specific role and he wasn't able to participate, right? Because you're not going to overtake Amari Cooper and, no matter how talented you are in theory. So I do believe in Tillman, but if you're a winner and you can hold, I do prefer the Evans Pacheco side of that. But if you need the wins right now, take that trade. I like that. Again, believe in Tillman and Anthony Richardson. We touched on Anthony Richardson starting at the beginning of the show. The biggest beneficiary from Anthony Richardson coming back is probably Jonathan Taylor. As we kind of saw earlier in the season, Jonathan Taylor really, really benefited when Anthony Richardson was there. One, the threat of him really opens things up. Two, they were not aggressively utilizing Anthony Richardson at the goal line. So Jonathan Taylor was getting, great space, solid opportunities in terms of yardage, and then the goal line opportunities as well. So Anthony Richardson coming back, I think this is a good buy period for Jonathan Taylor. So if anybody, I like that question because that's a nice little trigger point for me there. If anybody is looking to buy a running back, you want to take a chance on somebody with higher upside that might be a little bit undervalued right now, Jonathan Taylor is excellent. Oh, thank you, user. I can't say all those numbers, but I appreciate the comment. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Let's do a couple more questions and then we got to take an ad break. Technically speaking, we should have taken an ad break a little bit while ago. Actually, let's go ahead and get that in. YouTube questions. I see you from Chef and W Alex and Mike. I will answer them in just a question. I am going to go ahead and do our little commercial break here. Hear a little bit of a word from our sponsors. And we'll be right back after this.
Oh, every week I'm answering these start-sit questions on Sunday morning. I go to the weekly rankings on playerprofiler.com just to make sure that my instincts are correct, and sometimes they're not. And guess what? More often than not, I go with the projections. You may not feel great about starting Daniel Jones or Wan'Dale Robinson, but the projections say, hey, that's the move. It may not feel right, but you use those projections to get it right. That's the power of the Player Profiler system. It's Evan Ringler, it's Bradley Stalder, it's Theo Greminger, of course, it's Billy Muzio making these rankings possible. The season rankings, so you know who to pick up, who to trade for. The Dynasty rankings are part of this. The offensive line rankings from Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. Then we get our cornerback rankings, which show which corners are matched up with which wide receivers. And now, in collaboration with the IDP show, we have IDP rankings. Did you know that? Did you? So go to playerprofiler.com. Use promo code PODFATHER. Get you 25% off the player rankings package right now at playerprofiler.com. Enjoy!
All right. We are back from our little commercial break, answering more questions here, and then we're going to talk about our topic here. Sometimes I get carried away with the questions. Our topic of the panic meter on wide receivers for the rest of season. All right. This is a fun question. It is not fantasy football related. Yeah, if y'all don't have fantasy football related questions, drop them. I am perfectly okay with that. Oh, hold on. I did not mean to accept somebody else going live. Sorry guys, it's just me. Let's see here. Sorry, that distracted me. Had someone else come live in on the TikTok there. Question from Alex, and I'm showing this one because this is fun. Would you trade dark meat for white meat? I'm a dark meat kind of person. I actually just, because this show is at 6 p.m. Central Time, had to make dinner for my kids before that. Quickest thing for me to do is bake chicken. I know that's so basic, but it's always chicken thighs for me. So I'm a dark meat girly. That is my preference there. So I would not trade dark meat for white meat, unfortunately. Thighs over breast. Trade McBride on a bye. Need to drop Rico Dowdle, Estime, or Tyler Allgeier. Oh no, I hate that for you. Because the guy that technically I do think it has to be, it can't be Dowdle because while again, not a good offensive situation with Dak being done for the season, we do know that Rico is the RB1 there. Even with Zeke contributing some carries, I guess, just because I was laughing. Someone was commenting that the only reason that Zeke gets carries is because Dallas is truly trying to tank, and that's the best way for them to fail is to let Zeke carry the ball. I don't disagree on that one. But at the end of the day, Rico is the RB1 there, so it can't be Rico. So it's between Estime and Allgeier, and I hate that because Allgeier is a high upside handcuff, right? If Bijan were to go down, we factually know that Allgeier steps into a clear RB1, top 10 RB1 upside. We've seen it before. So I hesitate to drop Allgeier. I kind of lean towards dropping Estime, and I hate that because I do feel like I feel positively about Estime. But if you've got to drop someone in order to pick up a tight end, I do think it has to be Estime because ultimately we do still have to see some progress from him in terms of participation in the pass game. The switch in terms of carries that we saw, 14 carries from him, 1 carry for Javonte Williams, dramatic turnaround. I love it. It's also difficult to trust Sean Payton, right? But at the end of the day, I do really like the potential for him. But in terms of fantasy football, if he doesn't have that receiving upside, honestly, the production that you get out of him on a weekly basis might not be that different from Allgeier strictly as a handcuff option, with that little standalone value that he offers. So yeah, I think it has to be Estime. I would maybe see though, if you can make a quick trade, see if you can pawn Estime off on someone for a bye week fill-in for McBride. I think that might be the only option there, or Allgeier as well might be another one. But I just think Estime probably has the higher trade value if you have the ability to do so. Or you're saying not playing a defense. No, I still wouldn't. I get that. I hate to do that. You're saying kind of walk away from the points there on defense. It's a possibility. If you're a favorite, you can do that. But I would still want all the positions held. Just got an interesting trade offer. I send Najee for Ray Davis and Braelon Allen. My team's out of the race this year. Yeah. In Dynasty, I would for sure. I would make that trade. Yeah. I think that's well worth it. They're 2 high upside handcuffs. I know we might have to, realistically, it's painful because they're both tied to very young backs. So opportunity for you might not hit immediately, but I always love keeping backs like that on my roster. It may take a couple years, but eventually it pays off. Injury happens, and then you're sitting there and you've got an RB1. And sometimes it happens sooner than you might assume, right? I mean, think about Chase Brown. If you were, a Chase Brown, I was a Chase Brown, say truther. I hate saying truther 5,000 times over, but yeah, someone who drafted Chase Brown like crazy in as many of my teams as I could. And, in theory, it was potentially going to take some time to pay off. It took a year. That's all. It took a year for it to pay off big. So yeah, I would absolutely make that trade. That's a good one. Ceedee for Wilson. I do. So Russ does have top 10 potential rest of season. But if I were targeting a quarterback, I still might aim a little bit higher than that. I don't hate it, but at the end of the day, Ceedee will still have volume. The volume last week was extremely ugly, but it does feel like that's a little bit of a low sell on Ceedee. Unless that's super flex. If that's super flex, then yeah, I'm okay with that. Oh, Garrett Wilson. Jeez. I don't know what. Yeah, sorry. My mind blinked to Russ immediately. CD for Garrett Wilson. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I mean, the Jets offense is such a weird situation in terms of the receivers because we've got Devontae, who is technically leading in the targets, but he's not being productive with them comparatively. Obviously, the upside has just been higher for Garrett Wilson. It's kind of a funny situation that's ended up there. But yeah, I don't mind that trade at all. For someone that obviously has a healthy, capable quarterback, as much as I joked about Aaron Rodgers earlier in the live. Hill and K9 for CMC. It's a lot, but I don't mind that. I do kind of, it's a lot because of the re-injury risk with Christian McCaffrey. It was such a weird injury. We don't know, at some point, maybe that flares up and then you've traded Tyreek Hill and Kenneth Walker for an unusable player. So there is a lot of risk associated with that. So just kind of beware on that one. I think it's a fair trade for a clear RB1 who looked, in terms of fantasy production, good in the first week back. At the same time, it's a whole lot. I talked about Tyreek Hill earlier and the potential of, at any time we could see him get back on the same page with Tua. And when he is on the same page with Tua, he has literally arguably the highest upside of any receiver in the league. What three would you start? Ceedee, London, Ridley, or Nico? That one is a pretty easy. Now, granted, it does depend on if we get that confirmation on Friday. I want confirmation on Friday that Nico is good to go. I don't want to wait until the weekend and have, game time decision and, we don't know for sure. If we get that confirmation that Nico is good to go on Friday, that's my safety time frame. If you're confirmed good to go and active on Friday, you're going to start, then I feel confident that you're going to have a full workload. If it goes beyond that, that's when we start to get into that weird situation of, is he going to be limited? Is he going to be on a snap count? So if we get healthy confirmation on Nico, it would be London, Ridley, and Nico that I would go with. If we get to Friday and it's still a question mark, I would just go ahead and start Ceedee. Now, granted, you do, and I'll check here real quick because off the top of my head, I can't remember. Now, granted, you technically don't have to make that decision immediately because they're both Monday night games, so you don't have to worry about that. I just would prefer somebody that is good to go by the end of the week, and we don't have that lingering possibility of limitations there, but you don't have to make that decision. But again, it's between Ceedee and Nico that you sit, very dependent on health. Let's do one more question, and then I got to talk about one of these wide receivers. Start Downs. Oh no, I don't get that one. Ask that one again because it says start Downs, sell, or Judy. Afraid of Downs with Richardson. I'm guessing sell was supposed to be someone else, and I don't know what the typo was. But yeah, let's transition to kind of the topic that we had here of panic wide receivers. I love how within my show I get to the main topic like maybe 30 minutes in. And we'll bounce back and forth on this one. The wide receiver that I want to talk about, start off here, and I think this one is kind of timely because we talked about Trevor Lawrence earlier, and we've had some questions about Brian Thomas Jr. as well. Brian Thomas Jr. and his his prospects moving forward rest of season. Now let me preface this by saying this is nothing negative with him. I love Brian Thomas Jr. One of my favorite receivers heading in, or one of my favorite rookies heading into the season, specifically in training camp was where I kind of turned things around and really saw that Brian Thomas Jr. could be the alpha, the wide receiver one in this offense. So like clearly. Now, granted, as we look at him and the production that he's had this season, it's been very clearly big plays, big yardage, and touchdowns, right? He's a big play receiver. He's got that high touchdown equity. I mean, we saw it in college, so it all makes sense. This just kind of lines up with the type of player that he is. They have not been, and he can handle volume. This is not a situation where they can't get him on the field enough and they're just, unable to really supply him with a significant amount of targets. That's not the case. He can handle it. They're just not targeting him significantly. We're looking at Brian Thomas, and on a given day, we know he's going to get four or five targets. And if he gets a touchdown, big touchdown, it'll be a fine wide receiver one fantasy production day for him. But if he doesn't get that touchdown, we kind of are in dire situations where he's just someone that we feel super uncomfortable and he isn't even putting up flex-worthy value. Now, with Trevor Lawrence, we were willing to take that risk, right? Because Trevor Lawrence, we're aired out, big plays happen, and we feel comfortable taking that risk because Lawrence has the arm to get it down to his big wide receiver downfield. Mac Jones does not, unfortunately. And we saw exactly what that looks like with Mac Jones at quarterback last week. Oh my God. 2 receptions for 12 yards. In my wildest dreams, I know Trevor Lawrence would not give that man that's so horrible. So horrible. And I feel so bad for him, right? With Mac Jones at quarterback. And granted, maybe things can turn around. But that matchup with Minnesota, maybe just defensively, Mac Jones couldn't handle it. But it should have been a high volume situation. It was a weird game. But unfortunately, I just don't feel comfortable with him this week either against Detroit. I don't feel comfortable with Mac Jones being able to take advantage of these difficult matchups here, air it out, and provide volume downfield for Brian Thomas. So when we're looking at that Jags offense, the only player that I kind of feel comfortable with is Evan Ingram, just because volume will continue to favor him. And touchdown equity is not going to be super high, but that's the only usable asset there. Unfortunately, as long as Mac Jones is at quarterback, I can't feel any level of comfort with Brian Thomas. And I hate that, man, because I want to start Brian Thomas, but we can't do it with Mac Jones at quarterback. Now, kind of what do we do with him at this point? Because we did get the news, and we talked about this earlier in the live, that it's possible that Trevor Lawrence can come back not this week, not next week because they have the bye week, but after the bye week. So we'd be looking at a potential turn for him in week 13, but that's a potential return. That's what they're hopeful for. We don't know for sure if that is going to happen. And risking it all on Brian Thomas, hopefully getting Trevor Lawrence back when the Jags are essentially playing for nothing. They are not competitive. They will not be in the playoff hunt. They invested all this money into Trevor Lawrence in the offseason. To think that they're going to rush him back on an injury for what? For a situation where the season is a failure and they're probably not going to have this, cross our fingers, coach for the remainder of the season. I can't depend on it. So at this point, if you're able to sell Brian Thomas, we can't start him this week. If you're able to sell him, I would do so. I mean, it's possible that he could have a big game because maybe Mac Jones can get the ball out there one time for him to get one big play, and he's got the talent to get into the end zone. But at the same time, I don't want to take that risk. I don't feel super comfortable with it, unfortunately. So this is a situation where maybe you take that Trevor Lawrence returning news and you try to sell Brian Thomas and capitalize on it while you can. Oh, man, I hate that for him. Yeah, and I see questions around Brian Thomas here. Question, do we drop Brian Thomas? If it depends on what you're picking up on waivers and the depth of your league. If you're picking him up for, like, let's say you are picking him up for your thin at running back and you need to pick him up for maybe Audric Estime is still out there on waivers and you can do that. That does make sense, right? Because, that's a running back that has potential to take over as the RB1. So making that move, that is okay. because we don't feel comfortable trusting starting Brian Thomas this week. He'll be on my bench, unfortunately. Then we've got the bye week, so you'll be multiple weeks without him. If you have to make that move in order to get these wins because you can't afford to wait, then yeah, I would make that move. If you're solid for the playoffs and you are not worried about that, you're the number 1, number 2 seed, you're heading for a bye week, then I could hold. But if you're fighting to get in, make that drop to grab a Audric Estime, a Ricky Pearsall, perhaps. Oh, God, wide receiver is not very beautiful out there, unfortunately. But those are probably the guys that I would feel most comfortable with. It's another weird waiver week, unfortunately. Sorry, my throat is like super dry right now. All right, let's answer some more questions here. Would you start Rome Odunze over Brian Thomas this week? So Rome Odunze is another wide receiver that I was going to talk about, another panic meter wide receiver. But I would start Rome Odunze over Brian Thomas. If I'm looking at the guys that I feel the least comfortable with, it's definitely Brian Thomas because of the quarterback situation. Rome Odunze's situation we can talk about here as well, because this is another one that I wanted to hit on in terms of the viability for DJ Moore within this offense, because it does appear that technically the panic meter is on every single Chicago Bears receiver. More so in terms of who we're panicking about the most is definitely going to be DJ Moore, because that is the big wide receiver that was drafted earlier. A guy that we have been optimistically ranking as a wide receiver too, despite the struggles that the Chicago offense has had. And when we're looking at that offense and the way that it's heading, we have seen Rome Odunze kind of pushing forward a little bit, gaining target share within that offense. No longer is it kind of like, okay, the one guy that we trust is DJ Moore. That's not the case anymore. All these wide receivers are kind of being spread around. The ball's being spread around them fairly evenly here. Last week, we saw 6 targets to every single wide receiver. And I think like 4 maybe to Cole Kmet here. So when there's a very even kind of flat target share, and I feel like that's the direction that we're heading in, I do feel more comfortable with leaning towards a guy like Rome Odunze and thinking that as Chicago was kind of preparing for their future, as they're kind of transitioning to realizing they're technically still in the playoff hunt. Don't get me wrong on that one. They could turn things around, but their schedule is daunting. The remainder of, and that's the problem here as well, in terms of how much we are trusting these wide receivers moving forward, particularly DJ Moore here. Chicago's season was weird to where the first half of their season had 0 divisional games. The back half of their season is Detroit twice, Green Bay twice, Minnesota twice. This is not a good situation, right? Because if there's one thing that is, if there's one thing that these NFC North teams are doing extremely well, they are all doing extremely well defensively, especially in terms of creating turnovers as well. Because I know sometimes people look at Green Bay's defense and think that it's kind of shaky, but they're generating a lot of turnovers, and versus a team like Chicago that can create fits for a rookie quarterback here. So we've got a weird situation with these receivers where unfortunately we don't trust them at all. DJ Moore is in a bad spot. He doesn't offer the high upside. And again, we had the firing of Shane Waldron. So as they kind of start to craft what this offense looks like moving forward, we could see them preparing for the future and pushing Rome Odunze up a little bit. So yeah, something to keep in mind. Drop Taysom Hill for Dalton Schultz. I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't think what we got out of Taysom Hill was terrible last week. It was, it's interesting because as we continue to move forward, the wide receiver situation does not change for New Orleans. Taysom Hill is still going to have to contribute from a receiving perspective as well. So maybe that does kind of cap the upside, because if they're having to utilize him as a route runner, if they're having to utilize him out there as a pass catcher, that does limit opportunities potentially on the ground for him. Dalton Schultz, they're very similar in my opinion. Probably will give you a safer floor on a weekly basis than Taysom Hill, but I think that's fairly even. If you need the safer floor, I can make that drop right there for Dalton Schultz. Is Brian, good question. Is Brian Thomas droppable for Mike Williams? I would not do that. Just because I would rather hold on to the possibility that Trevor Lawrence does come back after the bye week. then the hope that Mike Williams is going to significantly increase in his role in the offense. And I think it will increase, right? For sure. And he does mesh very well with Russell Wilson. But I kind of don't see Mike Williams as being a high target guy in that offense. So we're going to be depending on him basically on a weekly basis of getting that random deep ball from Russell Wilson. And while I do think that'll come, potentially, I don't want to rely on that. So I don't feel personally comfortable with putting Mike Williams in my starting lineup right now. So if I'm not putting him in my starting lineup, I would just rather hold Brian Thomas on my bench just because the upside is higher for him. Oh, good question. Projected to lose by 20. Start 2, Demario Douglas, Keenan Allen, Alec Pierce. With Anthony Richardson coming back, he loves his deep balls to Alec Pierce. So if you're projected to lose, you need a big win. You need a high upside play. Yeah, I would put out Alec Pierce, and I would put out Demario Douglas. I do like Drake May this week. I like the matchup for him. Perhaps we see, the New England wide receiver core has been peculiar, right? Just because none of them has been particularly usable because we've had players like Kayshon Boutte step up and be unexpectedly decent, but not usable from a fantasy perspective. So the entire receiving core is just kind of like, meh. And really Drake May has been thriving off of his rushing upside as well. So, I considering the matchup is good, I would go with Demario, and then Alec Pierce is the other one. Desperation start, Keaton Mitchell or Jerome Ford, half PPR. I was hoping that we would have seen a little bit of action for Keaton Mitchell last week. The fact that we didn't does make me a little bit worried there. And this is a good matchup for the Cleveland run game, but I actually think this is potentially a good breakout game for Nick Chubb. Jerome Ford getting some carries does make a little bit of sense, but I kind of feel like I would take that chance that Keaton Mitchell is going to get a little bit of increase in workload, healthier this week, get out there a little bit more and see some volume, maybe make a couple big plays here and there. I feel like the upside is higher with Keaton Mitchell versus Jerome Ford. Desperation start to get you like 3 points. Jerome Ford is probably the better option. Desperation start to get you 10 points. Keaton Mitchell is probably the better option there. 12 team, super flex, standard, tight end premium, 6-point touchdown. Start DeAndre. Start 3. DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore, TJ Hawkinson, Lad McConkey, Mark Andrews, Brian Robinson Jr. That this one feels very straightforward for me. With DeAndre Hopkins for sure. Last week's production for DeAndre Hopkins is very excusable. It's okay. It was against the New York Jets. It was against the Denver Broncos. Patrick Surtain, lockdown corner. We expected that, decreased level of production for him. So I'm not worried about what I saw from DeAndre Hopkins last week. I still think that he's a fine start. So DeAndre Hopkins, TJ Hawkinson, considering that it's tight end premium and we had that uptick in volume, for him last week. That's the other direction that I would head. And then between Lad Andrews and Brian Robinson Jr., I think that I might, considering that it's standard, I might take that chance and go with Brian Robinson. So those are the 3 that I would go with. Hopkins, Hawkinson are the ones that I feel solid with. And then Brian Robinson is the 3rd one that I say, okay, I lean that direction because you're in standard. Maybe get a little rushing touchdown there from him. He's healthy and confirmed. Now, the good thing about Brian Robinson is that we've got that he's going to play. And this is not a game time decision. We've got that confirmation here. We're feeling good about it. It's going to be a fun matchup. I'm looking forward to this matchup so much. I don't know about you guys. I'm sure you are as well. Because sometimes Thursday night games can be a little suspect. But the fact that we got that confirmation from him early, I'm feeling confident in Brian Robinson. So that is the direction that I would head. Ooh, Jayden Daniels or Bo Nix. Jayden Daniels, I know that's a tough decision right there. I lean towards Jayden Daniels. I know that the upside has not been what it has previously been. And I do like Bo Nix this week. I have them very close. And there's no negative indictment on Jayden Daniels. But again, I do like this matchup here for this to be a nice high volume matchup here to benefit Jayden Daniels. Maybe a multi-touchdown game from Terry McLaurin, 2-touchdown game. Good upside on the ground as well. So Jayden Daniels is the direction that I would go. Would you trade away Connor for Jaden Reed? You have Bijan Mixon. Oh, you have Bijan Mixon, Pacheco, and ETN. Yeah, I don't mind that trade. I think that's fair. Start 2, Dobbins, Sutton, Mooney, Tillman, DeAndre Hopkins. Oh my gosh. Those are all very, 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 very viable options there. Dobbins is the one that I would, put away to the side immediately, just because we saw that that mild decrease in volume with Gus Edwards coming back was very interesting. While I do feel confident in Dobbins as the RB1, upside might be a little bit capped now that we have Gus Edwards back. So we're looking at Sutton, Mooney, Tillman, and DeAndre Hopkins. The direction that I kind of lean here between these guys is towards, my instincts say Sutton and Mooney. Let me check my rankings, because I'm actually kind of curious. Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly how I have that ranked. Sutton I have at wide receiver 19, Mooney at wide receiver 15. Where is Hopkins? 25. Okay, I wouldn't have guessed that. And then Tillman is 22. So yeah, good. I just wanted to verify for you. It's Sutton and Mooney that I lean towards on that one. Pick 2, Swift, Lockett, Waddle, DJ Moore, Dobbs. Swift for sure. Last week I expected a little bit more out of him, but again, clear RB1, feel super comfortable with him. So Swift is someone that I would easily put out. And then between Lockett, Waddle, Moore, and Dobbs, these are all very, very flat, similar guys on this one. I kind of lean towards going with, this is assuming that we have DK Metcalf back. I kind of lean towards going with Waddle, even though the production has been very minuscule on that one. My gut tells me to lean towards Waddle on that one. If there's no DK, then it's Lockett that I would go with. Xavier Worthy has been disappointing. Is he worth dropping? Yes, absolutely. And I hate that. I hate that for him. I don't mean to say that so confidently that we should be dropping him. But yeah, he's just, if he didn't pop last week while DeAndre Hopkins was covered by Surtain, it's not happening. Unfortunately, it's just not going to happen for him. So, yeah, Xavier Worthy, maybe the future will be a little bit brighter for you, but this year is not the year. Before we take a few more start sits, there is one more wide receiver that I wanted to talk about specifically, and we have not gotten any questions about him because he's on a bye week here. It is Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers here, who is a very interesting situation of the talent we know for sure. And it's just a matter of the quarterback being able to supply volume from him. Earlier in the season, obviously, we saw that those massive games from him being supplied by Daniel Jones. We felt like, okay, look, this guy's quarterback proof. Daniel Jones can get to the big receiver, get it into the general vicinity, and we were feeling confident. Unfortunately, prior to this week here, we had 3 finishes outside the top 25 for 3 consecutive weeks. And it was just tragic, unfortunately. 6 targets, 50 yards. It is, or 6 receptions, 50 yards. It is what it is. He's still going to get, there's a mild level of panic because we know that level of upside simply is not there. With Daniel Jones and where he is right now, unfortunately, and we don't even know if we're going to get Daniel Jones when they come off the bye week. We don't feel super confident in how productive those targets will be for Malik Nabers to be able to take advantage of them. Now, the good thing is, and why I would feel more comfortable with a guy like Malik Nabers over DJ Moore is I know that Malik Nabers will get a certain level of targets. He is the wide receiver one of that offense. I know that the volume will be there. It's just a matter of those targets being actually usable for him and touchdown opportunities being there. Because last time we saw Nabers catch touchdown was way back in week 3. It has been a while, unfortunately. But when we're looking at a guy like DJ Moore, the possibility of DJ Moore getting 10 targets moving forward, it feels less. It feels very slim. So they're two kind of different situations. The lower panic for me is with Nabers because the floor is still going to be there. It's just unfortunately that the upside won't be there. And someone mentioned Nabers has a great rest of season schedule. So that also contributes to the level of panic being a little bit lower on him as well. Targets will be there. His rest of season schedule is so much better than a guy like DJ Moore, who has arguably a nightmare rest of season schedule, unfortunately. And so we're in a situation where we feel just a little bit more comfortable with it, even though we technically don't know who the quarterback will be, unfortunately. All right, take some more questions here to round things out for about 5 minutes here. Let me catch up and make sure that I have, because I know there are some additional YouTube questions that I might have missed here. So I'm going back here. Traded Garrett Wilson from Jason Ortiz. Traded Garrett Wilson / Cedric for Jayden Daniels, Adams, Marvin Harrison. Yeah, you won. You won for sure. Then you also traded Pollard and Hawkinson for Ceedee. Did you win? That one. Now, granted, you're saying that you didn't start TJ Hawkinson and you never started him because you have Kittle. I don't like rostering 2 tight ends, especially when they're 2 high upside tight ends and you won't be able to capitalize off of one, although technically you can flex. The only problem I see with this is that, again, CeeDee Lamb, we didn't talk about the level of, he's a panic meter guy. We didn't really talk about that one in detail with Dak Prescott out for the season, unfortunately. Targets, again, this is kind of similar to a Malik Nabers situation, right? Targets will be there rest of season for him. He's a wide receiver 1. We don't have to worry about that. It's just the quarterback situation being essentially destitute, right? So you'll get a situation where he can get you 10 fantasy points in full PPR, but are you getting that 20 plus ceiling that you had before? No, I don't think it's there at all. Like, just at all. And also, as I'm looking at Hawkinson compared to Kittle, this is just a theory, right? Because I do still have Kittle higher than Hawkinson rest of season. But depending on how this week goes, I could see where I could bump Kittle down. Because as we see with Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, they're now 3 deep at wide receiver and they feel comfortable with it. They were 3 deep before because Jennings was there, but previously the way that Shanahan was using the offense, they just didn't really push volume to that wide receiver 3. It was just Debo and just Ayuk. And every now and then you get a little bit of contributions to Juwan Jennings as the 3rd wide receiver. But with the way that he is maybe adjusting this offense moving forward, Juwan Jennings stepping into Brandon Ayuk's role, right? Because that's essentially what's happening. Juwan Jennings is stepping into Brandon Ayuk's role. Now, Ricky Pearsall isn't specifically stepping into Juwan Jennings' role. That's the difference here. We're seeing this offense adjust a little bit. So if we're seeing all 3 of these wide receivers be usable, that does potentially bring down target share for George Kittle. I kind of want to see how it shakes out this week because it's just a theory based off of one single week, and we don't know for sure. But kind of watch and monitor that situation for those who have George Kittle, that we could be in a situation where we're seeing like a slight decrease. Now, granted, a slight decrease still makes Kittle one of the better tight ends in the NFL. So don't like massively panic, but it's just kind of a theory here. Oh, good question here. I'm going to show this one right here from Chef. Do you think Otton will be good beyond this year? Just got offered another offer to trade Kelsey for Otton. He's 25, feels like a smash yes. I don't think that's a bad. Actually, I have a Kelsey team that I'm starting right now, and I have Otton on the bench. in Dynasty, and heading into the season, right, I was like, oh my God, I've got to do something at tight end because I know that I am losing Kelce within the next couple of years. And I didn't think that I could rely on Otton. Now we're looking at this situation. And even before Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down, Otton was showing signs of being a dog, right? He was showing signs of being somebody who is a viable starting tight end on a weekly basis, and they were starting to integrate him more into that offense. I feel like maybe they had to adjust, or maybe the new coaching staff had to get to know him and how he played within this offense as the season went on. He proved himself. He's clearly stepped up. And I think moving forward, now granted, the only bad thing that continues is that it's tough as a tight end to succeed when you are the third option. And with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, you are the third option. At some point, Evans, being an older wide receiver, could be out of the situation, but that's not next year, right? So when we're looking at the situation, I think he's going to be good beyond, because I do believe in the talent. I think when people were and I saw these kind of comments on social media, kind of talking negatively down on Cade Otton, I feel like we've been burned by the illusion of the Sam Laporta stepping in and having high production as not that it's an illusion, but having high production as a rookie that has made us forget that it often takes tight ends multiple years to break out, right? Like you're not always Travis Kelce immediately. Yes, I feel like we've gotten these unrealistic expectations because we have all the Sam Laportas and the Brock Bowers and the Dalton Kincaids coming in here and making an impact immediately. And we're forgetting that sometimes tight ends take a little second to adjust to the NFL, right? Because they're doing different things. They're integrating differently in the offense. They're running different routes. Maybe they had hands in college, but they really weren't utilized significantly in college from a receiving perspective. Maybe they were just athletic. So there's like 1,000 different directions that tight ends can go. And Cade Otton, this is just his third year. This is not unusual for a tight end to have a breakout performance in his third year of his career. So just pump the brakes on any kind of negativity around him. I do think he has a legitimate future there. The only thing I will say in terms of that Kelce for Otton trade, they would 100% have to throw in something else with Otton. It doesn't have to be a lot, a little bit, right? Because at the end of the day, whoever you're trading with gets the tight end one right now. Arguably between him and George Kittle, right? In terms of if you're competing right now, Travis Kelce is a guy that you need to pay a premium on beyond just Cade Otton, right? You need to throw something else on there. I would want some kind of pick on there. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you need to give me a little something else if I'm giving you Kelce, so you can go off and win a championship right here. So yes, get them to throw in a little pick on that one as well. But yeah, I like that theory right there. Let's see here. We've got some more questions, making sure I'm going through. Thoughts on Rashad Bateman? That's an interesting one. Rashad Bateman's role, I don't think, is obviously massively affected by Deontay Johnson being in the offense of two very different players. It technically conflicts more with Zay Flowers, and we haven't seen it made a major impact here. Did you guys see the comments from Mike Tomlin saying that he essentially saying, oh, I haven't really seen anything in terms of tape on Deontay Johnson in Baltimore yet? That would crush my soul if my former head coach said that about me. It was so shady. Why does Tomlin do that? I mean, I love him for it, but that would crush my heart if I was Deontay Johnson and that was said about me. But with Rashad Bateman, I think he's fine rest of season. I trust it. I think his role is solidified with that offense, and I like the leap that he's made for real. So moving forward throughout his entire career, they made that investment in him from a contract perspective. So feeling good about Rashad Bateman moving forward, long term in Dynasty, and them short term usable as well this year. Oh, thank you for the heart, Jay. Appreciate it. Let's see. Start Dell, Downs, or Judy. I prefer to start Tank Dell right now on that one. That's my preference there. from JT, should I start Downs or Judy? Wow, that's the same question that I was reading on 2 different platforms, just minus the other player. But yeah, start Downs or Jerry Judy. For you, I know Anthony Richardson coming back may feel like a bummer, but they did have a decent connection at some point earlier in the season, last year a little bit as well. So it's not a destitute situation. I don't hate this. It's not as if Joe Flacco was making it rain for Downs either. Making it rain. Oh my God, how old am I? But Josh Downs is the one that I would start over Jerry Judy on that one. I know Anthony Richardson coming back might make you panic a little bit on that one, but it's still Josh Downs that I would go with for sure. Dell or Bateman? Good question. I would still start Dell over Bateman. I'm kind of hopeful that the return of Nico Collins can help Dell out a little bit more. We saw them operate well with each other last year. So Dell and Downs in the offense with no Stephon Diggs does make me feel a little bit better that they will be able to play off of each other. Nico being the alpha. Did I say Downs? I'm sorry. I meant Dell and Nico. I think I spoke and had Downs in my mind, but you guys know what I meant. Dell and Nico in that offense together, playing very well off of each other. Nico is clearly the alpha on that one. But again, this is could help Dell play off of him and help his fantasy production a little bit. Addition of receivers. It's the addition of Stephon Diggs kind of made things just kind of weird in terms of target share within that offense, right? Tank Dell to the back. Do we think that Stroud will bounce back with Nico, or is he mediocre rest of season? I think he'll bounce back. Although I do think that bounce back situations need to be kind of kept in realistic check, like low end QB1 bounce back, top 5 upside that he had. Like, I just feel like that was a little bit of a fantasy mirage as we continue to see more of these young running quarterbacks entering the league. We've got, Jayden Daniels, we've got Bo Nix. As we continue to see these guys pushing into the league, that's going to continue to push back from a fantasy perspective, a guy like CJ Stroud. So low end QB1 bounce back is well within reason. Oh yeah. Someone dropped Tank Dell in your league, picking him up. Yeah. Rest of season, Otton or Hawkinson, and Steelers D or Dolphins D this week. So rest of season, I do think it's Hawkinson. Rest of season, I do. While I do love Cade Otton, and I think last week's underwhelming production is not indicative of anything negative against Cade Otton. It was just kind of it was a bad game from Baker Mayfield, unfortunately, right? But sometimes those things are bound to happen on that end. But the volume that we saw to TJ Hawkinson in the better offense, it just feels like that's more of a stable situation. We're also going to get Mike Evans back here in the near future, so that will push Cade Otton down a little bit in terms of target share. Still solid, right? Not knocking him or saying we got to move off of him by any means. So, but Hawkinson is the one that I would rather have. And the defensive question was Steelers D or what was it? Steelers D or Dolphins defense on that one. I lean towards the Dolphins defense on this one. Steelers defense is arguably, has the higher potential for turnovers. Dolphins defense has been solid, and Gardner Minshew is good for a pick six. So yeah, I would go with Miami's defense. I know maybe that puts you in a bind because it means that I'm assuming that you were kind of keeping Pittsburgh's defense there. So you'll have to keep them on your bench. But yeah, Steelers defense is the way that I would go. Would you do Amon-Ra for AJ Brown and you have Hurts? Yes, for sure. I like that trade. I have Connor and Tracy on a bye. I need to win this week. Should I trade McConkey and Pearsall for no? Oh gosh. Should I trade McConkey and Pearsall for Javonte and Leggett? No, you can't. I truly do not trust that Javonte will get a significant amount of carries. The only thing that can keep him fantasy relevant is his receiving upside. I don't trust Sean Payton to continue with the running back split that he had last week, right? 100%. Do I trust it? No. But do I want to risk it and start Javonte Williams this week? Absolutely not. Do I prefer to risk it and grab a Audric Estime off of waivers or trade for an Audric Estime and see what can happen? Yeah, 100%. You're right to try and trade McConkey and Pearsall for a running back, but I would trade for anybody other than Javonte Williams. Javonte is someone who I would absolutely not start this week. I do think that Estime is taking over that backfield. I could not start Javonte this week, unfortunately. So try to trade for another low end RB2, high end RB3 with a little bit of upside there. Maybe you target an Austin Eckler. Obviously, Brian Robinson coming back, lead back there, but Eckler is someone who has standalone value and you can get on a budget, and that would be a good, nice little cheap bye week fill-in for Connor and Tracy. So that's the kind of running back that I would try and trade for. Someone that, because you're strong at running back. You don't have to start that running back next week, right? You just need somebody that's going to get you fantasy points this week. And Javonte's not that guy. Aim for somebody else. One more question here. I have Mixon, Taylor, H. Good Lord. I have Mixon, Taylor, H-Chan, and Walker. Which two do I start? And who's in flex? Oh my gosh. So you got to sit one of those guys. So which two are you starting in flex? So you got to start H-Chan. I love this matchup for Jonathan Taylor. You got to start him. And then I would flex Joe Mixon and sit Kenneth Walker. Man, you got options at running back. You got options. Walker is, in fact, the guy that I have ranked the lowest on that one. Yeah. A-Chan's my RB5. Mixon is my RB6. And Taylor is my RB11. Walker's RB13. All right, guys. That wraps things up. I got to head out here and get some kids to bed. Mom duty's taken over here. I appreciate you all joining in. If you are not following, I would greatly appreciate that. Wherever you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you're following Player Profiler. You can also follow me on my YouTube at It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME. That's the same on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok for you guys. You guys on TikTok, if you follow, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll do, more continuous live start sits for you guys. And make sure this is a podcast, by the way, in case you're like tuned in somewhere, you're not sure. This is a podcast. So if you could subscribe on podcasts, all podcast platforms, to the Dear Miss Fantasy Show, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for all tuning in. I appreciate you all. Again, good luck with your lineups this week. If you have any questions, feel free to tag me on social media anywhere, drop a comment. Otherwise, I will talk to you again next week. Have a wonderful week. Hope you all win, unless you're playing against me. Then I hope you lose.